In this video, we're going to show you to install a lower control arm in your Toyota Camry located underneath the front of your vehicle. Use a pry tool and go ahead and pop off that center cap. Set that aside. Use a 21mm socket to go ahead and loosen and remove the lug nuts. Remove the wheel and set it aside. Using a 15mm socket, we're going to go ahead and loosen and remove the nut on the lower portion of our sway bar end link. Loosen and remove the upper sway bar end link nut. Pop that out. Loosen and remove the nut for the tie rod. If your tie rod doesn't pop out that easy, go ahead and strike the side of the knuckle here, and that should release that unit. You can go ahead and set that aside. Using a pair of pliers, go ahead, remove your cotter pin here. Cotter pins are a one-time use, so make sure that you have a replacement cotter pin. Go ahead and remove this, set it aside. Using a 30mm socket, loosen and remove the axle nut. Once you have that nut loose, I'm going to go ahead and push on that axle and make sure that this is free floating. If this is stuck, you can go ahead and use a punch in the center. You want to go ahead and loosen that axle from the splines from the inside of that wheel hub. Use a 12mm socket or wrench to loosen and remove this bolt for the flex hose. We're going to remove the two 22mm nuts from our strut bolts. Now, if the nut and the bolt spin, just use a 22mm wrench to hold this side while you loosen the nut. And at this point here, we have free range here to go ahead and move our knuckle around. I want to go ahead and remove this here and then push this in, and you can remove the lower bolt. Now you want to hold this, and now we want to go ahead and work on pushing the axle out of the wheel hub. So push that in as far as you can. You're going to slowly start to release the knuckle forward and pull that axle out from the back side. We want to go ahead and use our 19mm socket on the ball joint nut here. We did spray it with some rust penetrant, so we want to go ahead and try and break this free. Now sometimes there may be a cotter pin that goes through the castle nut. Ours is so rusted that the cotter pin is either just rusted in there or it's been broken off. We're going to go ahead and try and spin this. So now that we have this nut removed, I want to go ahead, I'm going to position my axle towards the rear. Let that drop down a little bit. And I'm going to raise this back up. I'm going to install a bolt. The purpose of doing this is when we separate the control arm from the knuckle, the strut will hold the knuckle and the brake assembly, and it will not pull on your flex hose here. I'm just going to go ahead and tuck my tie rod end out of the way a little bit. We're going to use a hammer and strike right here on the knuckle. I'm also going to use a pry bar pushing on the knuckle on the control arm to go ahead and get that to separate. There it is. We can see that the knuckle is separating from the ball joint. Let's go ahead and lower our vehicle down. Using a 17mm socket, let's loosen and remove all three of these for the ball joint. I'm going to use our pry bar, flex the control arm down, pop out the ball joint. If you follow the control arm back, you're going to find your 19mm bolt right here. Let's go ahead and loosen and remove that. Now our bolt was spinning. Now if your bolt is spinning with the nut on top, it is a 19mm. I'm going to use an open end wrench. Pop that in there. Let's go ahead and loosen this. Now on the top here, go ahead and pull this nut out. There's normally a lock tab on here that just kind of bent, so I had to use that wrench on there. Control arm here bolted to the subframe, two 19mm bolts here. Then we'll go ahead and remove these two bolts and set those aside. And spin that control arm out. On the old control arm, we want to go ahead and slide off this sleeve. Slide it onto the new control arm. Let's go ahead and install our new control arm. I'm going to insert the back portion of our control arm into the subframe. Swing this around. And you'll have to manipulate this knuckle around a little bit to get that to line up over here. Now we have two bolts here. The longer bolt goes on the back side, short bolt on the front. Now we're just gonna work this into place a little bit better. We can use a pry bar. Work that up. You can see we can kind of flex that, get those holes to line up. Drop that in, see if we can get that started a couple threads. Give it a tug. Yep, that's caught. Let's go ahead and get the forward bolt lined up here. Once again, just kind of move that pry bar with that bolt moving around. Now, could you have removed the complete knuckle and removed that off to the side? You could have, but it's easy just to support everything here without disassembling all the brakes. Okay, we're going to leave these loose. Let's go ahead and get the rear bolt installed on the back side of the control arm. Now at this point here, I want to go ahead and line up the hole with the control arm and the frame. It's not quite going in yet. You can use a screwdriver or something round to go ahead and kind of get in and move that arm over. We're going to tap our control arm around a little bit to get this bolt to line up in there. So we put our nut on the top here to lock that into place. And we're just doing this by hand to make sure that we don't cross thread anything. At this point here, we can go ahead and tighten that bolt down. Go ahead and use our impact gun for that. And we'll come back and torque that down after. Let's now go ahead and lower the vehicle and get the ball joint installed. Now we're installing our pry bar through one of the holes in the control arm. We're going to use this as leverage to bring this down. So I want to bring this down. Watch out for your CB axle boot, so make sure that is out of the way. Bring that down, install the ball joint. Can release that control arm. At this point, we can install our bolts and nuts. We'll install the two nuts first. Then we can go ahead and maneuver the back part of that ball joint up against the control arm to get this rear bolt installed. Back with the pry bar. Now when doing a job like this here, you definitely want to start these nuts and bolts by hand. If you put a power tool to these right away, you have a high probability of cross-threading these and just opening up a huge can of worms. And there we have it. We have all three started. Let's come on back. We'll tighten these in, securing that ball joint to the control arm. Now we did tighten these down. We do also want to torque these into position. Let's torque down the ball joint nuts to 94 foot-pounds. Torque the rear bolt to 152 foot-pounds. Use our wrench up top here to keep that upper nut from spinning. Going to install our nut here. Now I want to pay attention to this stud here, and there's a hole in it for our cotter pin, and ours is running through here and coming out the front side. Going to install our nut. Once we get that started, we can go ahead and tighten that down. Now I'm just going to go ahead and put our tie rod end on just like this. That's going to keep our knuckle straight, and that way there I can go ahead and torque that nut to 90 foot-pounds. We're going to install our cotter pin. In this case here, because it hits the back side of the knuckle, we're going to start to roll these. As we feed that through. On this top tab, I'm going to roll over, tap that down, and then we cut off the excess. Now for some reason, if you go to tighten this nut and you torque it and the holes don't line up, you want to go ahead and continue to tighten the nut until the next notch in the castle nut lines up with it. Never loosen this nut for it to line up. Always tighten it to the next notch. That's all set. Pop that. I'm going to remove our lower bolt here. That'll allow us to go ahead and swing this. Feed that axle in. At this point, we're just going to work this to get this lined up. And it'll take you a little bit of time to finagle this in. Here we go, get that bolt in. Now we can get the lower bolt installed. Get those nuts on. We're just going to go ahead and get these started. I'm going to go ahead and snug down the control arm bolts here. Go ahead and torque these bolts down to 152 foot-pounds. Tighten down our strut bolts. Let's torque these bolts to 156 foot-pounds. Install our bolt for our flex hose. Let's go ahead and snug that down. Install that tie rod in, get that nut installed. You can snug that down. Torque the tie rod nut down to 36 foot-pounds. Go ahead and install that end link. Good, tighten down these nuts. Torque these down to 29 foot-pounds. Go ahead and position that wheel. Make sure that axle is all the way through. Install your axle nut. Let's go ahead and tighten that down. I'm going to install 2 lug nuts. Now we lower the vehicle, for us, we lower the vehicle down. I'm going to use our pry bar, like so. I'm going to torque down this axle nut to 217 foot-pounds. Remove the pry bar, remove the lug nuts. Now that this nut is torqued, I'm going to install the crown here. Make sure you obtain a new cotter pin. Feed that through. Going to bend over our upper tab here. Snip off the excess. Now that you've completed this here, you want to go ahead and install the wheel. Take this vehicle for road test. You definitely want to bring it down and have an alignment performed after having this work done. Go ahead and take your wheel. Line up those studs there. And get our lug nuts started. Once we have all of these on, we'll go ahead and snug them down. Go ahead and torque your lug nuts down to 76 foot-pounds. Do this in a crisscross or a star pattern. If you have a hubcap or a center cap, go ahead and install that now. And you're all set.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.